Lockheed Martin Helendale facility and the Anthill at Tejon Ranch. Regarding the Lockheed Martin Helendale facility and the Anthill at Tejon Ranch, I know Stephen Greer has claimed that Helendale is an underground base with a UFO runway. I am about 99.99999% certain that he is incorrect. Helendale is a RCS, Radar Cross-Section Analysis Facility. The runway is known Distance Calibrated Instrumented Range, where they measure and analyze RCS of air, ground, water vehicles, and equipment. The underground area is a multi-story below-ground building where a large adjustable pylon is mounted. They attach scale model articles and actual test articles of vehicles and equipment to the pylon, and then they can raise the pylon and attached articles to various heights from ground level to tens of feet above ground level. The pylon has a known radar cross-section that the test will account for. At the other end of the runway, there is a control room and various multiple radar emitters and receivers. The distance to the pylon is a known measurement. They will blast the test article with radar from every known type of system, US, Russian, and Chi-Com, so they can determine how effective those systems are at detecting aircraft, vehicles, and equipment. The article can be adjusted on the pylon to check different aspects to the emitter and receiver: front, rear, side, oblique, above, below. By using different size scale models, adjusting the power of the radar, and moving the emitter and receivers up and down the runway, they can simulate different distances from feet to miles. It is a myth that stealth aircraft are invisible to radar. Depending on the distance and angle presented to the radar receiver, they can be visible on certain systems. For sure, stealth aircraft have a very small RCS compared to non-stealth, but it is not zero. The USAF spends lots of time collecting and measuring electronic signatures of enemy radar systems, so when they are planning a mission, they can fly a certain route to minimize or avoid their exposure to certain systems. So, instead of a straight in and out flight to a target, they may fly in a very circuitous path to the target at various altitudes to avoid being illuminated by enemy systems. Electronic warfare goes hand in hand with this. They can jam radar systems so they see a wildly inaccurate picture of where the aircraft is, or they might spoof the radar into believing there are more than one aircraft inbound. All of this to confuse the enemy, so they aren't sure what exactly is going on, hoping to confuse them enough to vector their interceptor aircraft to the wrong place, or causing them to misallocate any SAMs. As far as the Anthill, I'm not sure what they are referring to. Google search for "this does not return anything." If the Anthill refers to another UFO, runway and entry to an underground facility, that could be referring to a RCS facility on Tejon Ranch west of Edwards AFB, which used to be operated by Northrop. This facility is no longer operational, but it is set up pretty much like the Helendale RCS facility. I know it is set up exactly how I described the Helendale facility because I have been to the Tejon Ranch RCS facility when it was in operation. As part of a job I once had, I to brief the supervisory staff there, and I was provided a tour of all of the buildings there with the exception of the secured active classified workspaces in the buildings. Those workspaces had movable partitions like you would see in a high school gymnasium, and the buildings had red emergency-type rotating beacon lights that were turned on to indicate to staff that someone without clearance was in the building. When the light went on, they would close their partitions. The buildings were set up with these partitions and workspaces so they could adjust the size of them to accommodate different size test articles, from scale models to full size. The control room for the range was like some nutty, mad scientist lair, with more racks of electronic equipment than I've ever seen. A definite electronics geek paradise. Shortly before I went there, I had read a Tom Clancy non-fiction book where he explained about RCS. The supervisory staff seemed quite surprised that I had any kind of understanding about what they were doing there. Some other interesting things. At the end of the miles, long dirt access road the gate to get in was locked, but the adjacent guardhouse was unmanned. When they came to the gate to get me, they offered me the use of snake gaiters to wear for protection from rattlesnakes. They had an ongoing problem with rattlesnakes getting into their buildings because they were located literally in the middle of nowhere. Downtown Bum FK Egypt, miles from other buildings. I declined to use them, but I was cognizant of where I was putting my feet. The other interesting thing was the crazy amount of scale model aircraft hanging from the ceilings in their buildings and workspaces that were left over after their testing. Before I was able to go there, I had to provide them my name and social security number so they could run a background check and criminal record check to make sure I wasn't some kind of foreign Jason Bourne spy. When I was at the pit area where the pylon was raised and lowered, there was no evidence of tunnels or shafts leading to an underground base. The reason I do not believe the Helendale RCS facility is a UFO runway and base is clearly evident when you look at a map. The facility is located extremely close to a busy major state road, and there are numerous homes and buildings quite close to it, including a housing development built around a man-made lake in the desert. I'm not sure if the raised pylon is visible from the roads, but any kind of aircraft departing or arriving from the pylon runway area would be quite visible, except of course if they are able to optically cloak it. The proximity to the road, houses, buildings, and open desert would make concealment from observers or drones very challenging. There are many more places in the desert that would be a far better location for a secret base. As a civilian aircrew member on a helicopter air ambulance, I have flown hundreds of hours at low altitudes in all of the restricted airspace and military operations areas in and around Edwards AFB and China Lake in what is called the R2508 complex, and I have even landed on the Edwards AFB runway several times. To fly through R2508, you must have clearance from Joshua, a specific air traffic controller that handles all aircraft in the restricted area. 99% of the time air ambulance traffic gets priority clearance to fly the shortest and fastest route to get where you need to be, so I've flown at low altitude over areas mostly inaccessible to non-military aircraft. The R2508 complex is so huge that it doesn't make sense that they would have underground facilities when they could put up hangars and covered aircraft shelters, like the ones visible in satellite images of Area 51 and the airfield at Tonopah, in 1,000 different places out there that are literally tens of miles from the nearest road or vantage point.